All right, so on this lesson, there is a way to do it every single time by hand. However, there is also a way to kind of cheat the system. Now, there is something that we've already discussed before, and that is the trig table. So if you look at this slide down here, we have the trig table. Now, this will really help out. We have discussed already on how to build the first part of this trig table right over here. And then to build the second part would just be to flip it over respectively. So for instance, sine of 30 degrees equals 1/2. The cosecant of 30 degrees will just be 1/2 flipped over. And then you have your answer. Same thing with the cosine of cosine of 30 will equal square root of 3 over 2, where the secant of 30 will just be that flipped over, and then you rationalize it. Now, if you do not remember on how to build a trig table, please take a look at this video right over here where we have already discussed on how to build a trig table, and then you can come back to this video. Now, once you have the trig table, remember, we are working with reference angles. We're not working with the entire angle, so we will only need to know a few of the trig functions. But here's something interesting. This won't make sense now while you're listening to it now, but once we figure out some examples, you can come back to this portion of the video and it would make a whole lot more sense. When you run these trig functions on angles, depending on what quadrant it's in, it's either going to be positive or it's going to be negative. Now, there is a cool way to understand which one that's going to be. If we look right over here to the graph that it has, where it has quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4, it tells you exactly which ones are going to be positive. If we look at quadrant 1, all of the trig functions are going to be positive. If we look at quadrant 2, 2 of the trig functions, or technically 4 of the trig functions, are going to be negative, while only sine and cosecant are going to be positive. Quadrant 3, a similar thing happens. Only tangent and cotangent are going to be positive. And quadrant 4 is going to be something similar again, where cosine and secant are going to be positive, where the other two are going to be negative. There is a cool way to memorize which ones have what, and that is going to be all students take calculus. I learned this in calculus class. That is why I memorized this one. So all students take calculus, and you should take calculus too. But as we can see here, all, or the A, does actually mean all. They're all positive. But in the second quadrant, sine is going to be positive and its reciprocal function. Here, tangent is going to be positive, and here, cosine is going to be positive, along with their reciprocal functions. All right, so let's hit up an example of this. So we want the exact value of our trigonometric function. Here we have cosine of 240. First thing that we 100% know is that the angle looks something along the lines of this. If it's hard to graph for you, please look at our video on how to graph angles. Now this means that the reference angle is going to be right over here. So we'll take 240, which is the entire thing, subtract 180, and then we'll have our reference angle. If that's confusing, please look at our previous video on how to find the reference angle. 240 minus 180 equals 60. Now, how are we going to find out what our trig functions equal? Well, that is where our list comes in. So I have just copied down our trig table from the previous example, and we're going to use this. If we look, we're working with 60 degrees. So if we look for 60 degrees, we're going to find 60 degrees right on this bottom line. So we want to draw the sine, cosine, tangent, cosecant, secant, and cotangent for 60 degrees. And the cool part is that they're already there for us. Now here's the thing. Instead of finding cosine of 240, what we're going to do is we're going to find cosine of 60 degrees. Why 60 degrees? Because that is our reference angle. Now you know why it's so important that we know how to find our reference angles. So let's find what is cosine of 60 degrees? Well, cosine of 60 degrees, if we look down below, is just 1/2. So we will say 1/2. How does that help us find our cosine of 240 degrees? Well, let's write that down. Cosine of 240 is going to be the exact same as its reference angle, which is 1/2. But there is one more step. We need to know, is it positive or is it negative? And that's where all students take calculus comes in. I've already written it down, ASTC. And we also know that the terminal side is in the third quadrant. It is right over here. The only thing that's going to be positive in that third quadrant is either going to be tangent or cotangent. We can tell that by the T. So that means since we're dealing with cosine, it's going to be a negative. So we'll just slap a negative onto our final product, and cosine of 240 degrees is going to equal negative 1/2. Let's try that out with cosecant of 5 pi over 6. First thing we're going to do is we're going to draw out the angle. Now I'm going to do this the way that I really like to do this. So here we have half a circle, that is pi. If we divide half a circle into 6 equal parts, that would give us our pi divided by 6. How are we going to do that? Well, we have two sides to this, so we'll divide the right side into 3 and the left side into 3. Just like that, we got 3 pieces on the right side, we got 3 pieces on the left side. We have 6 equal parts. How many of those are we using? Well, we're using 5 of them because that's going to be 5 pi over 6. So we're going to use 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That is our angle. So what is our reference angle going to be? This is going to be our reference angle right over there. So we're going to try and find whatever the cosecant of pi over 6 is. Now again, if that was hard, please look at our previous video on how to do this. Also, if you do not like this method, please use whatever method you like to find the reference angle. But we want to find out what is cosecant of pi over 6. And you might say that the table doesn't show angles in radians, we only have angles in degrees. We got 30, 45, and 60 degrees. Well, what you can do is take a look at that video once again, and we'll show you the table and the radian degree equivalents as well. Now, here's the cool thing is that since all we have is 30, 45, and 60 degrees, all we have to do is just convert them to radians, and we're fine. I have already gone ahead and done so for you, so 30 degrees is going to be pi over 6. 45 degrees will be pi over 4, and 60 degrees will be pi over 3. We are finding cosecant of pi over 6, or equivalently cosecant of 30 degrees. So we can look down at our list and we can find cosecant of 30 degrees equals 2. So we're going to say 2. Now, we are not trying to find cosecant of pi over 6. That is merely the reference angle. What we want is cosecant of 5 pi over 6. Now, what is that going to be? Well, we know that this terminal side is in the second quadrant. Now, if we do our all students take calculus thing, we can find out that sine and cosecant are actually positive in that quadrant. So we're going to leave our cosecant of 5 pi over 6 as being 2. It is not negative because it is in the quadrant that we have said it to be positive. Now, let's go ahead and try that out for ourselves. Please, right here, pause the video and try and do these by yourself. I have left the trig table up above. That way you would be able to make reference to it quite easily. Good job on pausing the video. I know you did because I trust you. Let's first go with cosine of 135. So first of all, let's graph this out. We know that cosine of 135 is going to be less than 180 but above 90. So our terminal side is going to be somewhere over there. I don't want to think about it exactly. I just know it's going to be in that quadrant. So my angle is going to look like this. what is my reference angle going to be? My reference angle is going to be this one right over here. So how do we find a reference angle? I know that it's going to be 180 degrees minus our original angle. So let's do that. 180 minus 135 equals 45 degrees. So we want to find what is our cosine of 45 degrees, and that will help us find our cosine of 135. So we're just going to make reference to our chart up above and find that cosine of 45 degrees equals square root of 2 over 2, which also means that our cosine of 135 is also going to be square root of 2 over 2. And the last step is just to find out if it's positive or negative. So I'm going to write out my all students take calculus and find that in my second quadrant, sine and cosecant are going to be positive, which means that my cosine of 135 is going to be a negative. So cosine of 135 is going to be negative square root of 2 over 2. Now to do the tangent of 5 pi over 6 is actually kind of easy because we did a 5 pi over 6 angle up above, so we know exactly where it's going to be. You can actually just look at that and copy it down if you wanted to. But to reiterate and graph it one more time, I know if I have half a circle and I divide it into threes on both sides, I would have divided my pi into 6 pieces, just like that. And I know that my angle is 5 of those pi over 6 pieces, so it's going to be right here. And my reference angle is going to be the angle that is between the terminal side and the x-axis. So I know that is going to be my reference angle. I also know that that size of that slice is just going to be pi over 6. So what I want to find is what is my tangent first of pi over 6, and then I can worry about what my tangent of 5 pi over 6 is. If I look at my table, I'm using the top line of pi over 6, and I'm going to go to my tangent, which is square root of 3 over 3. So I know that tangent of pi over 6 is going to equal square root of 3 over 3. That also tells me that my tangent of 5 pi over 6 is also going to equal square root of 3 over 3. The only question is it positive or negative? So I'm going to go ahead and write down all students take calculus and find out what is positive in the quadrant that my terminal side is in. Well, I can see that my terminal side is in the second quadrant, which only sine and cosecant are positive up there, which means that tangent is going to be negative. So my tangent of 5 pi over 6 will be negative square root of 3 over 3.